consultant in the front office with the Pacers a couple of years back, and also ESPN.com. What does the Jerry Colangelo hire by the 76ers mean, and how did it all happen? Let's bring Kevin into the conversation and get his take. Kevin, welcome back. We had you on a couple of weeks ago to talk about where this plan was, and it seemed like it had stalled and it hit a kind of a neutral spot for a little while. But now, Jerry Colangelo's presence, what does it mean for the 76ers?
Well, I still think we're trying to tease out exactly what it means, but certainly, the reporting that has been done by ESPN's Brian Windhorst and Jeff Silgett from USA Today pretty clearly that this was something that, owners had been pushing for and the league had been pushing for, and that, Colangelo is kind of a natural choice in that standpoint because of his close relationship with the NBA, obviously with his time with the Suns, but then currently with USA Basketball and the Hall of Fame still very much involved, and that they were the ones behind kind of this marriage, if you will.
How much do you think that the lack of victories on the floor, the lack of quote-unquote competitiveness factored into this, or is this more of a business move by the NBA, who is frustrated by a team that is basically taking advantage of the system they created?
Yeah, I tend to think that the economic part of it is more of a cover than anything else. And, if the Sixers were, winning on their way to winning 20 games, that it'd be a lot more difficult to make this case, I think, basically, to complain. Tom Zilli, SB Nation, the Sixers aren't actually that bad in terms of road attendance. They're middle of the pack. It's really hard for me to understand that teams are really suffering because of the fact that they're having to play the Sixers at home. I think, there is an element probably of jealousy that other teams see them, not spending a lot of money and still benefiting from these great revenues that the league is having as a whole, with a new TV deal about to kick in, and just the success the league is enjoying. And I think that, and the fact that, there's an envy that a lot of teams wish that they could accumulate the kind of draft picks that the Sixers are, but don't have the stomach for that kind of rebuilding process. I think that probably plays into it.
Yeah, Kevin, I kind of agree with you on the financial aspect as a red herring, because if you think about this league and the television revenue as opposed to one single gate, that's not going to affect the bottom line of most teams. Now, getting into this dynamic, though, between Jerry Colangelo and Sam Hinkie, is there any way, obviously Colangelo's not coming to Philadelphia, he's going to live in Phoenix, is there any way somebody with that resume is going to take orders and not be the final decision maker in basketball operations?
It seems unlikely. I think the one scenario that, if you believe that was going to happen, you'd point to is Jerry West in Golden State, someone with, like Colangelo, a very long track record of success as a general manager and an executive in this league who, is very much part of a collaborative process for the Warriors that has worked great for them, resulted in the championship last year, undefeated start so far this year. That's one scenario if you saw that happening, but it doesn't seem like that's how Colangelo is going to envision his own role. I don't think that, he's got enough on his plate with USA Basketball in the Hall of Fame that I don't think he'd come back just for that kind of scenario.
Kevin, real quick on that, because we mentioned, he mentioned West and Colangelo, and I had said, is this something we might see more of? Teams that have a guy who has an idea but want to bring in a second mind to kind of say, look, we like what you're doing. The Sixers and the franchise, the ownership group likes what Hinkie has done, but he's ruffled feathers with other teams. They need to bring in a second guy to kind of keep Hinkie away from dealing with them so that he can continue to do what he's doing, yet teams are dealing with Colangelo. Do you think more teams might go down the Golden State, Philadelphia route where they bring in a more seasoned guy to kind of massage some of these relationships?
Yeah, I think it's an intelligent strategy if it's something that you're doing from the start of the process. If this was Hinkie and a veteran GM in that Colangelo vein, I think that would have made a lot of sense. You know, someone to go out first off and sell this publicly to fans and to the rest of the league, and then also to maintain those relationships with agents and other teams' front offices that, I think have been somewhat compromised by what Philadelphia has done over the last couple of years. That could all be very positive. Trying to do that midway through the process seems a lot more challenging, I think. And, it seems unlikely that that's the scenario, unless this is a case where basically it's Joshua Harris is saying, hey, I'm happy with the direction of things, but I got to get the NBA off my back. They're constantly on top of me, so this is the only way that I can get them to go away is by hiring Colangelo and appearing to change course. But that seems like a long shot.
Yeah, Kevin, and that's talking with Kevin Pelton of ESPN.com, but the one thing about Hinkie, and I've had reservations about this plan, and the one thing the supporters I always point out is they act like it's in a vacuum. I use that term. And there is a business aspect. There is a human element. One of the things I've been concerned about is the environment around young players. Some have called it toxic, and the fact you have people like Jahlil Okafor and Nerlens Noel, who seems to be regressing without any veteran leadership to kind of lead them through the NBA pitfalls. Do you place any stock in that?
I mean, it's so tough to say because, each individual is different. And, we don't get to see Jahlil Okafor in a situation like Minnesota where they have veteran leadership with Kevin Garnett and Tayshaun Prince and Andre Miller and get to, compare what he would do there to what he would do in Philadelphia. There's no easy experiment like that. But I think if you were going to have some frustration with the way that things have gone and make a change but not so abrupt as that you're starting to trade a bunch of guys and trying to win now, that's kind of the middle path of starting to acquire some more veteran leadership, do everything you can to put your guys in a position your young players in a position to succeed as part of their development, and still kind of continue on this plan of making a bunch of draft picks that you've accumulated and building slowly to build something sustainable.
Kevin Pelton's with us, ESPN.com. A lot of back and forth on Colangelo and the plan. What are some of you mentioned this over at ESPN.com, some of the scenarios for what Colangelo's presence could be? A lot of people, Kevin, think that this is virtually a credibility PR type of thing. And then, of course, the retort is, well, Colangelo wouldn't allow that. But is this the Sixers saying, look, we like what we're doing. We need someone to add credibility so that people understand that Jerry Colangelo agrees with what we're doing, therefore making it something that has credence now?
Well, like I said, I think that's probably only the case if Joshua Harris is still very committed to this direction, and he's the key figure in all this. I mean, I think a lot of people have there's been so much discussion of Sam Hinkie and the process and all of that, but I think there's a lot of GMs who, if given carte blanche, would try to do something similar to this in terms of struggling for several years, accumulating a lot of top picks, and trying to build that way. The problem with that, usually, I think the obstacle to that is that the owners are very short-term oriented. So, if Harris still has this long-term mindset that led him to hire Hinkie in the first place, then yeah, I think there's some possibility of that. I think the more likely scenario is that, we'll see maybe Colangelo doesn't become as involved on a day-to-day basis because of the fact that he does have these other duties and, he's 76. He's old to be running a team as a full-time GM, but that's where his son Brian, who has been out of work for the last couple of years since he was let go by the Toronto Raptors, I think when you talk to people around the league, pretty much everyone expects Brian Colangelo to be part of the Sixers front office very soon.
Yeah, and there's some talk that Jerry could get a stake in ownership, and then obviously Brian would be brought in, and that would probably be the end of Sam Hinkie. There's also some thought to the fact here in Philadelphia that Joshua Harris is attempting to buy Crystal Palace in the English Premier League in soccer, and that he was starting to tire of the national sort of narrative that the Sixers were an embarrassment under his ownership. Have you heard any of that around NBA circles?
I haven't heard that specifically, but it makes sense that no one would want to have their name connected with this, and I think it sets a picture for what people in England could expect if he were to make that kind of investment. Is he going to do the same thing where he strips down a team for its assets and runs it more as a money maker than a team that's trying to win games, which is a big difference between the American sports culture where there's an understood incentive to make money with teams in addition to trying to win, and in Europe the focus is much more on we're going to spend whatever it takes to try to win.
Kevin, there's a lot of debate between John and myself about, and a lot of people I'm sure, which is why I'd like to get your insight on this. What are people's thoughts about Sam Hinkie as a personnel decision maker? Because a lot of people say, okay, great, he's made all these trades and he's acquired all these assets, but I don't trust him to make the picks. I would say, well, he drafted Noel, who looks to be maybe the best player, if not the top three in that draft. Embiid, the jury is completely out on. Some people thought he was the best player in that draft, so it's hard to discuss. Same with Sarge. He drafted Okafor. And the retort is, well, it's easy to draft the best player when he's sitting right there. But the trades he's made, the stuff he's done, the players he's picked, what kind of reputation has Sam gotten as a guy, as a talent evaluator?
Well, I think this is in so many things that Hinkie is more of a symbol than he is an individual. So for someone that likes the rising influence of analytics in the league, then you're going to say, well, he's done smart things. He's taken, Embiid was a calculated gamble, and so far it hasn't paid off. But you had a chance to potentially get the best talent in that draft with the third pick, so you had to do it. If you're someone that is of a more old-school persuasion and thinks that this is a problem in the league, that there's so much emphasis on statistical analysis, then you're probably more likely to be questioning his decisions. Why, if you're willing to swing big and take these kind of risks, why take Okafor, who's probably got a relatively lower ceiling than Kristaps Porzingis? And as it turns out, at this point, Porzingis also looks like the safer pick a couple weeks into it. Why would you do that? I think, part of his plan is built on, I'm not going to make the right pick every time, so we need to accumulate as many picks as possible. It's in some ways built into the process, acknowledgement that he's not perfect as a decision maker.
Talking with Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com. Kevin, you mentioned a phrase there that I think defines this debate, and you mentioned old school. I think there is a generational gap here. And the people who support Hinkie have always looked at older people, and I count myself in that category, as the so-called old school people who don't get it, who don't understand. From that perspective, isn't bringing a 76-year-old guy who is the definition of old school a slap in the face to this new generation of people who think this is the only way to do things?
Well, the thing I will credit Colangelo with is he's always been a bit of a forward thinker, and he deserves a lot of credit for why the league looks the way it does in terms of his role on the NBA Rules Committee when they first allowed zone defenses, changed the illegal defense rules in 2001, and then when that didn't prove enough to arrest the slide of scoring, then they enacted the crackdown on hand checking on the perimeter that really is what set up the Suns and then eventually the Warriors and all the success that offensive-minded, free-flowing basketball teams have had in the last decade. And then Brian Colangelo, to his credit, was very invested in analytics in his time with the Toronto Raptors. I think he'd be seen as more of a new school guy. So, I don't think Colangelo is closed-minded in that regard, but it definitely is going from one extreme to the other.
So many people, and this obviously, Kevin, here in the Delaware Valley, where the Sixers call home for at least a couple of years until that becomes another topic. Now, that's not happening. It doesn't sound like anyway. But you never know with Harris owning multiple franchises in other sports. He could just up and take everybody. But, the debate of, hey, other teams, don't have to tank, and they tank 1 year and they get a player. But isn't that where this fundamentally the Sixers, and you mentioned about the patience that owners have, teams get bad that 1 year, but then they bail on what they really should do, and they try to take a shortcut. So they get a lottery player. They have about 20 wins. Then they go to about 28. They get a guy in like the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th spot. They pair him with that lottery player, and they get those two guys, and they get to about 32 wins. And then they try to bring in that free agent who's like a Nene, a mid-level guy, and they get stuck in the middle. Isn't that what the Sixers finally said? We want to avoid that blueprint.
Yeah, and I think you have to understand what they've done in the context of, Philadelphia being a competitive team that didn't really compete for a championship, basically since the end of the Allen Iverson era. I think that plays into this. And, to me, the opposite symbol on the other side is the New Orleans Pelicans, going back to the Drew Holiday trade that was the first big move for Sam Hinkie as GM of the 76ers, where that was a team that had drafted Anthony Davis the year before and build slowly with young talent around Anthony Davis. They went for guys who were, not older players necessarily, but young veterans who were getting paid a lot more than rookie contracts like Holiday. They added Tyreek Evans later that summer. You could even add Ryan Anderson, I think, into that group. And so far, they made the playoffs, I think, more quickly than they would have if they built slowly. They got back into the playoffs last year, but now this year they find themselves at a bit of a crossroads where, the coaching change to Alvin Gentry wasn't enough to push them over the top. How is Anthony Davis developed? Do you put the kind of talent around him that he needs in order to compete for championships as opposed to just being, maybe a 50-win team at best?
Well, that's where, John, they get stuck. They got Anthony Davis, and he's good enough to elevate them to such a level by himself, but then you get stuck into that LeBron situation where they can never put players around him. So essentially LeBron left. He let the Cavs tank without him, and then he went back there.
Yep.
Well, isn't that, Kevin, though, my argument to that would be this. It's tougher to win a championship. When you look at the landscape of professional sports, tougher to win a championship in the NBA than any other sport. Generally the same teams over and over again. The one superstar, occasionally somebody breaks through, and now it looks like Golden State's going to have a run. And good for that organization. But aren't the expectations as a whole unrealistic? If you're a 50-win team and you're not good enough, isn't that more of an NBA problem than anything else? Because it's impossible to get to the level that a LeBron James is going to get a team to unless you get the next LeBron James, and they don't come down the pike all that often.
Right, and I think this gets back to ultimately a lot of this is a question is what is your vision of success, what is your goal, and how much of a risk are you willing to take to get there? And I don't know that the Sixers would have changed anything, but so far they haven't found that guy because they haven't been lucky in the lottery. And then with health, I guess, in terms of Joel Embiid. But you're potentially one pick if Ben Simmons is that guy from changing things dramatically and, having that kind of building block to potentially, start to compete with. And, that's where, again, the difference is if you do get that kind of luck with Ben Simmons, you'd be building around him and other young players as opposed to just Ben Simmons.
Right, and look, is there any question in your mind, Kevin, because unbelievably I have discussions with Sixer fans who hate what's going on, and I try to ask them this question, and then, of course, they never want to answer. They tell you that, well, Henke can't draft. I don't know. He doesn't know what he's doing anyway. I don't trust him. But what is a better situation where the Sixers currently stand? Let's say Embiid, maybe he plays, maybe he doesn't, but you have that possibility and Saric possibly, plus possibly 4 picks. To have that possibility this offseason, or for this team to win 27 to 37 games and get pick number 14? What's a better situation for a team that's trying to build for the future?
Yeah, I think it's probably the first scenario. But one thing that
you'd be surprised by people's answers to that.
I wouldn't be surprised. I expect that. But I think another thing it gets back to is in this social media era, 24-hour news cycle, there's not that long-term perspective a lot of the times. And, things look, great the moment that you drafted Joel Embiid, and then things look terrible when when he goes down with a re-injury of his foot. And, it's still the same decision. You understood that there was a risk of re-injury when you drafted him, but everything is heightened there's such a this is either the best or the worst thing, and that the Sixers seem really afflicted with that over the last couple of years because of the fact that they've become a symbol for something in addition to who they are as a franchise.
Yeah, Keith, you mentioned that word symbol, and I've often said that Sam Hinkie's ultimate legacy will be making the NBA change. Is that going to happen, or are we assuming this is a market correction and that you really don't need that much change because other teams aren't going to do that?
I mean, I think, they view what happened over the last 24 hours is the change they needed to make. So instead of, fixing the underlying problem with, the draft and tanking and all of that, just make it so that, it's politically impossible to go as far in terms of taking advantage of the system as the Sixers were trying to do, and that basically, let what happened here be a lesson to anyone considering doing the same thing, that, we're going to step in and we're going to prevent you from doing it.
Kevin Pelton, everybody, and, the debate will go on. Jerry Colangelo is here. The ironic part of this whole thing will be Jerry's going to be here, and we were laughing about this earlier. Hinkie has virtually got him, all the ingredients to cook the meal. Now it's going to be like Jerry the genius, and Hinkie's not going to get any credit when this team actually gets comparable, top-level talent on this team, because it's all going to be that Colangelo came in and did everything. And so what will Hinkie's footnote be if this is actually successful?
I'm sure there are enough people who are supporters of the process that will keep that legacy alive if that does end up happening. But, yeah, it's really funny timing because, this probably next summer was the point where you were going to change the directions of things no matter what. And then, like you said, it's going to be attributed to this change in the front office as opposed to just being a natural part of the process. Yeah,
that's interesting, and you wonder if Hinkie, in fact, does get blown out of here, does somebody else pick him up and let him run his plan someplace else?
No, not after this.
Yeah, not certainly at this level. I mean, if he was coming into a situation where he was taking over a successful team and didn't have the ability to rebuild this dramatically, maybe, but it's just such a PR black eye, and that's where I think a lot of his failing is less what he's done as a general manager and more the fact that he's been so reluctant to speak publicly about things that it's allowed other people to speak for him and make him out into this evil genius, which if you've ever met Sam Hinkie is not what he's like at all, but he just is so reluctant to seek attention.
Kevin Pelton, everybody, there's a good article that he has about this. Further details at ESPN.com. And always a pleasure to catch up with you, Kevin. Thanks so much, man.
All right, thanks for having me on.